I'm a rookie parole officer, and my mentor is a legend in the department, celebrated for his incredible rehabilitation success rate. I just discovered his secret. He's been framing his most difficult parolees from minor crimes to send them back to prison, thus keeping his success stats artificially perfect. The manila folder felt cold in my hands, a stark contrast to the sweat beating on my palms. It was almost 10 at night, and the only light in the bullet pen was the green-tinged glow from my monitor, casting long, skeletal shadows across the rows of empty desks. The only sound was the low hum of the server room and the frantic, unsteady beat of my own heart. The name on the folder's tab was Leo Martinez. I remembered him, a wiry kid with haunted eyes who'd been in and out of juvie before graduating to state prison. He was one of Arthur Vance's cases, one of his few public failures. Sent back for lifting a wallet from a convenience store. A clean, simple violation. Except it wasn't. When I first started here 6 months ago, Arthur Vance was a god to me. He was the reason I took this thankless, soul-crushing job. I'd read about him in journals, seen him quoted in the news. He had a reputation for turning around the most hopeless cases, the ones everyone else had written off. His office wasn't like the rest of our drab, government-issue cubicles. It was warm, lined with oak bookshelves, and the walls were covered in framed photos and letters, thank you notes from former parolees, pictures of them with their families, at college graduations, holding their newborn kids. Each one was a testament to his life's work. He moved with a quiet, unshakable confidence, and when he spoke, his voice was a low, calming rumble that made you believe anything was possible. He took me on, he said, because he saw a spark of the true believer in me. I practically glowed for a week. Leo Martinez was supposed to be a routine file review. Arthur had asked me to close it out, transfer the records to the archives, a bit of procedural housekeeping. He'd sighed when he handed it to me, a rare look of disappointment on his face. "We can't save them all, kid," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Leo just couldn't shake the life." The official report was straightforward. Leo was identified by the store clerk, his prints were on the counter, and he'd confessed almost immediately on arrest. Case closed. But there was a loose document tucked into the back of the file, a supplemental report I don't think I was meant to see. It was a receipt from a pharmacy, time-stamped. The pharmacy was on the other side of the city. The timestamp was 2 minutes after the wallet was supposedly stolen. At first, I thought it was a simple mistake, a clerical error, but a knot of ice formed in my gut. I stayed late, telling myself I was just being thorough. I pulled the security footage request form. The box for the camera covering the pharmacy's entrance was checked, but the tape was logged as unviewable due to technical glitch. It felt too convenient. I cross-referenced the arresting officer's name, Officer Miller. He was the first responder on 3 of Arthur's other recent violations. All of them petty crimes, all of them clean arrests with swift confessions, all of them parolees who were on the verge of failing out of Arthur's program for more complicated reasons, like persistent drug use or associating with known felons, violations that would have reflected poorly on his methods. My breath hitched. I wasn't looking at a coincidence. I was looking at a blueprint, a quiet, systematic culling of the herd. Arthur wasn't rehabilitating the impossible cases. He was eliminating them from his record before they could stain it. He was manufacturing failure to preserve the illusion of his success. The thank you notes on his wall, the photos of smiling families, were any of them real? Or were they just the curated survivors of a system he'd rigged? The man who taught me to see the humanity in everyone, to believe in second chances, was the one deciding who was no longer worthy of one.
The janitor's cart rattled past the bullpen entrance, the squeak of the wheel echoing in the cavernous silence. I flinched, shoving the Martinez file back into the stack on my desk as if it were radioactive. My hero wasn't just a fraud. He was a monster dressed in a tailored suit, playing God with the lives of the most vulnerable people in the city. And now I knew. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on me, suffocating. Down the hall, a sliver of light still shone from under Arthur's door. He was still here. The polished brass nameplate on his door seemed to mock me from the darkness. Arthur Vance. The legend. And in my hands I held the evidence that could burn his entire world to the ground. My hand trembled, the edges of the manila folder crinkling under the pressure of my grip. I had to move. I couldn't just sit here, bathed in the sickly green light of my monitor, waiting for that sliver of light under his door to vanish and for his footsteps to echo down the hall toward me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the building and never look back. But another, colder part of my brain took over, a survival instinct I didn't know I possessed. I slid the Martinez file into the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, underneath the stack of dusty orientation manuals I hadn't touched since my first week. It wasn't a good hiding place, but it was better than leaving it out in the open. My movements felt clumsy, amplified in the dead quiet of the office. The scrape of the metal drawers sounded like a gunshot. I held my breath, listening, my eyes fixed on the hallway. Nothing. Just the hum of the servers, indifferent to the implosion of my world. I grabbed my jacket and slung my bag over my shoulder, trying to look like I was just a diligent rookie working late, a normal night. I walked out of the bullpen, my legs feeling like lead. Each step was a conscious effort. Don't look at his door. Don't look. Of course I looked. The light was still on. I imagined him in there, sitting behind his large mahogany desk, perhaps reviewing another file, deciding another man's fate with the stroke of a pen. Was he smiling, that calm, reassuring smile of his? The thought sent a jolt of ice through my veins. The walk to the elevator felt like a mile. When the doors finally slid shut, encasing me in the small, sterile box, I finally let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My reflection in the polished steel was a stranger, pale, wide-eyed, a ghost in a cheap suit. The man who walked into this building this morning was gone. He'd believed in heroes. This new man wasn't sure he believed in anything at all. The night air hit me like a physical blow, cold and sharp against my sweat-damp skin. The city streets, usually a comforting cacophony, felt menacing. Headlights from passing cars seemed to linger on me for a second too long. A man leaning against a lamppost, shrouded in shadow, seemed to be watching my every move. I ducked into the first subway entrance I saw, the scent of stale air and disinfectant a welcome assault on my senses. I huddled in a corner of the rattling train car, my bag clutched to my chest like a shield. I kept replaying it all, the receipt, the glitched tape, Officer Miller's name appearing again and again. It wasn't a mistake. It couldn't be. I remembered a conversation with Arthur from a few months back. I'd been discouraged about a parolee who was spiraling, missing check-ins, failing drug tests. Arthur had put a hand on my shoulder, his expression a mask of paternal wisdom. "Sometimes, son," he'd said, his voice that low, convincing rumble. "The best you can do for a man is to give him the structure he can't find for himself. Some people just need walls, real or otherwise, to feel safe." At the time, I'd thought it was profound. Now, his words sounded like a confession.
He wasn't giving them structure. He was putting them back in a cage and calling it mercy. My apartment felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. The 4 small rooms were suffocating. I paced from the kitchenette to the living room, the worn floorboards groaning under my feet. What was I supposed to do? Go to our supervisor? To internal affairs? I was a 6-month rookie with a conspiracy theory about the department's golden boy. They'd laugh me out of the room. Arthur would paint me as disgruntled, incompetent, maybe even unstable. He would dismantle my life with a few well-placed phone calls, and he'd do it with that same disappointed, sorrowful look on his face. He'd make it look like he was doing me a favor. The other option was to do nothing, to push the Martinez file to the back of the drawer and let it be buried forever. To come into work tomorrow and smile when Arthur greeted me. To sit in meetings and listen to him talk about rehabilitation and second chances, all while knowing the truth. The bile rose in my throat. I couldn't. I wouldn't be his accomplice. Leo Martinez was rotting in his cell because of a lie, and God only knew how many others were with him. There had to be more. More proof. More files like Leo's. Something so solid, so undeniable that not even Arthur Vance could explain it away. The thought solidified in my mind, a hard, cold certainty. I had to go back. I had to get into his office. I had to get into his files. The thought wasn't a comfort. It was a sentence. A path laid out in front of me with no exits. Pacing wouldn't help. Panicking wouldn't help.
I stood still in the middle of my living room, the city lights painting stripes across the floor, and forced myself to breathe. In, out, in, out. I needed a plan, not just a raw suicidal impulse. Getting back into the building was the first step. My keycard would still work, but there was Frank, the night security guard. A kind, older man with grandkids whose pictures he showed me every time I worked late. I'd have to lie to him, and the lie had to be good. I'd say I left my car keys on my desk. Simple, believable. The second step was Arthur's office, a solid oak door with a heavy brass lock. I had no idea how to get through it. My mind raced, sifting through every mundane memory of the past 6 months, a stray comment, a casual observation. Nothing. It felt hopeless. Then, a flicker. 2 months ago, the whole floor had been rekeyed after an admin assistant was fired. Arthur had grumbled about it for a week, complaining about the new keys. "Clumsy things," he said one afternoon, holding his up to the light. "Not like my old Medico, smooth as silk." He'd been leaning against the filing cabinets by the fire escape, and he gestured with the key toward the top of the metal cabinet. "Good place for a spare, don't you think? No one ever looks up." He laughed it off as a joke. But Arthur wasn't a man who joked about security. My heart hammered against my ribs as I rode the train back downtown. This time the other passengers were just blurs, their faces indistinct in the flickering fluorescent lights. The world had narrowed to a single terrifying objective. When I emerged from the subway, the office building loomed over me, a dark monolith against the bruised purple sky. It looked different now, alien and imposing. I pulled my jacket tighter and walked toward the glass doors, rehearsing the lie for Frank. He was sitting at his desk reading a paperback, the small television beside him playing a silent black and white movie. He looked up as I approached, his face breaking into a familiar, weary smile. "Burning the midnight oil again, kid?" he asked, his voice raspy. I forced a sheepish grin. "You know it. Except this time I managed to lock my car keys in my desk. Can you believe it?"
Frank chuckled and shook his head, pressing the button to unlock the turnstile. "Happens to the best of us. Don't stay too long. The ghosts come out after 2. I thanked him, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears, and swiped my card. The green light felt like an accusation. The elevator ride up was an eternity. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft chime of each passing floor. When the doors opened onto our level, the darkness was thick and suffocating. The only light came from the emergency exit signs, casting long, eerie green shadows down the empty hallways. My footsteps echoed on the polished linoleum, each one a cannon blast in the stillness. The bullpen was a graveyard of sleeping computer monitors and empty chairs. My own desk looked exactly as I'd left it, a scene from a life that no longer felt like mine. I walked past it, my gaze fixed on the end of the hall, on the sliver of darkness under Arthur's door. He was gone. I was alone. The silence pressed in, and I could hear the frantic, thumping rhythm of my own pulse in my ears. I reached the fire escape door, my hand trembling as I felt along the top of the tall, cold filing cabinet next to it. My fingers brushed against dust, then metal. A single key, taped to the top. I peeled it loose, the sound of the tape ripping seeming to tear through the quiet. I stood before his door for a long moment, the old heavy brass key slick with sweat in my palm. Arthur Vance. The nameplate seemed to glow in the gloom. This was it. There was no turning back after this. I slid the key into the lock. It felt alien, a violation. My hand shook so badly it took 2 tries to get it seated properly. I turned it slowly, praying it wouldn't make a sound. The mechanism was old, just as he'd said. It turned with a smooth, well-oiled click that was somehow louder and more final than any gunshot. I pushed the door open a crack and slipped inside, pulling it shut behind me. The air in his office was different. It smelled of old leather, lemon polish, and his faint, expensive cologne. It was the smell of power, of control. The massive windows behind his desk overlooked the glittering expanse of the city, a king's view. Awards and plaques lined one wall, and on another, the framed photos of his smiling, rehabilitated men. I looked at their faces, a gallery of his triumphs, and felt a surge of cold rage. How many of them were real? I turned to his desk. It was immaculate, a testament to an orderly mind. A single locked drawer was set into the mahogany. It had to be there. I didn't have time to be delicate. I grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from his desk, my reflection distorted and monstrous on its surface, and I got to work. The glass was thick, cold, and impossibly heavy in my hand. For a second I just stared at it, at the way the city lights warped and bent through its facets. This was a line, a solid, visible line in my life, and I was about to cross it with a piece of office decor. I unwrapped my jacket, folded it over several times to create a thick pad, and pressed it against the lock of the drawer. I wrapped my hand and the paperweight in the remaining fabric, took a deep, shuddering breath, and brought it down. The sound wasn't the sharp crack I expected, but a sickening muffled crunch of splintering wood and protesting metal. It was still too loud, far too loud. I froze, my whole body rigid, every nerve ending screaming. I listened for the sound of footsteps from the hall, for the elevator ding, for Frank's concerned voice calling my name. Nothing. Only the low hum of the city and the frantic drumming of my own blood in my ears. I didn't waste the silence. I jammed my fingers into the crack I'd made and pulled. The wood groaned and tore, the cheap lock mechanism giving way with a final metallic sigh. The drawer slid open. It wasn't full of files like I'd imagined.
Instead, there was a single, sleek black document box, the kind lawyers use for sensitive case materials. It wasn't locked. My hand shook as I lifted the lid. Inside, laid out in neat, orderly rows, were dozens of small brown manila envelopes. Each one was labeled in Arthur's precise, elegant handwriting. I picked one up. The name on it was Sarah Jenkins. I remembered her. A young woman, a single mother, trying to get her life back after a possession charge. Arthur had been so proud of her progress. Then, a few months ago, she'd been sent back for violating parole, possession with intent to distribute. Arthur had given a speech at the staff meeting about the tragedy of relapse, his face a mask of weary sorrow. With trembling fingers, I opened the clasp on the envelope. Inside wasn't a report. It was a small, clear plastic baggie containing a few grams of white powder. Tucked behind it was a pawn shop ticket for a silver locket, dated 2 days before her arrest. And behind that, a single sheet of paper, a printout of an anonymous tip sent to the department's general inbox, describing a woman matching Sarah's description selling drugs out of her apartment. It was a kit, a complete ready-made frame-up kit. I dropped it and grabbed another and another. They were all the same. Different names, different prepackaged sins, a baggie of pills for one, a cheap burner phone for another, a set of keys to a storage unit for a third. Some envelopes were blank, waiting for their designated victim. This was his system, his secret, not just falsified reports, but a cold, methodical assembly line for destroying lives, all to protect his perfect record. The rage that filled me was so pure and so cold, it felt like ice water in my veins. I started stuffing the envelopes into my jacket, grabbing handfuls at a time. I didn't have a plan beyond this moment. I just knew I had to get them out of here. This was the proof. This was the undeniable, monstrous truth. I was shoving a thick stack inside my coat when I heard it. A soft, distant chime. The elevator. Arriving on our floor. My heart stopped, dead in my chest. It wasn't Frank. He never used the elevator for floor checks. He always said the stairs kept him young. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. A heavy, listening stillness. Then footsteps. Slow, unhurried. The confident, measured tread of someone who owned the very ground they walked on. I knew that sound better than my own heartbeat. It was Arthur. A wave of pure animal panic washed over me. I looked wildly around the room, a cage with no corners. The door, the desk, the windows. There was nowhere to go.
The footsteps were getting closer. I didn't think, I just moved, diving headfirst, scrambling into the dark cavern under his massive desk. I curled myself into a ball, my knees pressed to my chest, the stolen envelopes a lumpy, damning armor against my ribs. I held my breath until my lungs burned, trying to make myself smaller, trying to melt into the shadows. He was humming, a low, tuneless sound in the back of his throat, the sound of a man completely at ease in his kingdom. The leather of his chair sighed as he sat down. The desk shifted, a millimeter of movement that felt like an earthquake from my hiding place.
I heard the rustle of papers, the soft click of a pen being uncapped. For a few minutes, that was the only sound besides his quiet breathing and the distant, ever-present hum of the city. My own breathing was a roaring torrent in my ears, and I was sure he could hear it, sure he could hear the frantic pounding of my heart against my ribs. I squeezed my eyes shut, picturing the layout of the room, searching for an escape I knew wasn't there. The door was the only way in or out, and he was sitting less than 3 feet from it. Then, the soft tones of his desk phone. He picked it up on the first ring. "Vance," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. There was a pause. "No, now is fine. What have you got on Miller?" My blood ran cold. David Miller. One of my guys. A good kid, working 2 jobs trying to support his sister after their parents died. Arthur had assigned him to me, saying he was a borderline case who needed a firm hand. "A pawn slip," Arthur continued, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Excellent. No, that's perfect. The timing is key. We'll let him feel secure for another week. Let him get that paycheck. It's more poignant when they feel like they're just about to make it." A cold chuckle followed. "I'll handle the anonymous tip myself. Just make sure the merchandise is logged by tomorrow morning. My reputation appreciates your discretion." He hung up. It was that simple. A man's life, his future dismantled in a 30-second phone call. The casual cruelty of it stole the air from my lungs. Something small and hard hit the floor and rolled. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, his pen, a sleek silver cylinder rolling to a stop directly in front of my face. I froze, every muscle screaming. His chair scraped back. The polished leather shoes turned, and a hand, his hand, descended from the heavens. Fingers long and manicured, a heavy gold ring on his pinky, reached down. They hovered inches from my face. I could see the fine lines on his knuckles, the faint scent of his cologne suddenly sharp and suffocating. My entire existence was focused on not breathing, not moving, not existing. The fingers closed around the pen and retreated. The chair scraped forward again. He hadn't seen me. The relief was so intense it was dizzying, leaving me weak and trembling in the dark. He worked in silence for another 10 minutes that felt like 10 years. Then I heard a different sound. A soft, metallic jingle. Keys. He was getting up. I thought, this is it, he's leaving. He's going to walk out and I can run. But his shoes didn't move toward the door. They moved to the side of the desk, right where the broken drawer was. There was a pause, a heavy, loaded silence that felt different from the quiet before. I heard him try a key in the lock. Then again. A low, frustrated sound escaped his lips. And then I heard the splintered wood. He didn't gasp. He didn't swear. He just went still. The silence stretched, thin and taut until I thought it would snap. I could feel his stillness, his sudden, sharp-edged focus. He knew. He knew someone had been there. He knew what they had come for. The air in the office grew cold, charged with a new and terrible energy. He took one slow step back from the desk, and then another. I could hear his breathing now, not calm and even, but a controlled, steady rhythm, the sound of a predator that has caught a scent. He stood there, in the middle of his kingdom, and he listened. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he was listening for me.
I imagined it as a beam of light, searching the corners, passing over the filing cabinets, the leather chairs, and drawing ever closer to the mahogany fortress that was my prison.
I focused on my breathing, trying to mimic his slow, predatory rhythm, hoping to somehow blend into the very air of the office. But my heart was a wild bird trapped in my ribs, beating its wings against bone, a desperate, frantic tempo that I was sure he could hear across the silence. The envelopes felt like they were burning through my jacket, branding me, announcing my crime to the still, listening air. His shoes moved, not toward me, but away, a slow, deliberate pivot and the soft crunch of his weight on the carpet. He walked to the window, and I saw his silhouette block out a rectangle of the glittering cityscape. He stood there for a long time, his back to me, looking out over the metropolis he believed he was protecting, one ruined life at a time. The silence was different now. It was no longer a listening silence. It was a thinking one. The silence of a chess master who has just seen his opponent's fatal blunder and is now contemplating the most elegant, most painful way to checkmate. I risked a breath, a shallow, desperate sip of air that tasted of dust and my own fear. Then he spoke, and his voice filled the room, calm and conversational, as if he were dictating a memo. "You know, the hardest thing to teach a new officer," he said to the glass, to the city, to me, "is that we are not in the business of rehabilitation. That's a story we tell the public, a comforting fiction for taxpayers and bleeding hearts." He turned slightly, and I could see the faint glint of his ring as he gestured to the empty air. "We are in the business of management. We manage risk. We manage filth. Some people are not meant to be a part of this," he swept his hand toward the window again, "this beautiful, functioning machine. They are grit in the gears. All I do, all I have ever done, is remove the grit." His words were not a confession. They were a lecture, a sermon from a pulpit of pure, unshakable arrogance. He wasn't talking to an intruder. He was educating a student. And in that moment, I knew he suspected it was me. This whole performance was for me. He was stripping away my justifications, trying to make me see the logic of his cruelty before he passed his sentence. The rage inside me, which had been a cold, sharp thing, began to burn. He was twisting the very purpose of our jobs into a monstrous philosophy, and he was trying to make me his convert. He turned fully from the window and began to walk back toward the desk. Each footstep was a hammer blow against my sanity. This is it. He's going to look. He's going to find me. I braced myself, my muscles coiling tight, a pathetic animal cornered in his burrow. But he didn't stop at his chair. He kept walking, rounding the corner of the desk, his polished shoes now just inches from my hiding place. I could see the perfect creases in his trousers. He stopped. He was standing directly in front of me, separated only by a thin sheet of wood. My vision swam, the darkness under the desk pulsing at the edges. "The real tragedy," he continued, his voice now directly above me, a low, resonant rumble, "is when one of your own becomes grit in the gears, when idealism, that most useless of emotions, clouds their judgment, when they can't see the beautiful, simple truth of the work." There was a soft metallic click. A desk lamp, I realized. A warm yellow glow suddenly spilled under the desk, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and throwing my terrified face into stark relief. I was exposed. Then, slowly, with the deliberate grace of an executioner, he knelt down. He didn't rip the desk away. He simply lowered himself, his knees popping softly, until his face was level with the opening. His eyes, dark and intelligent, found mine in the shadows. There was no surprise in them, no anger, only a profound, chilling disappointment. He smiled, a thin, bloodless line.
"There you are," Arthur Vance said, his voice a soft, terrible whisper. "I was wondering when you'd come out to play." Time seemed to fracture, stretching and snapping back in jagged, uneven beats. His face, illuminated by the warm, accusatory glow of the lamp, was a landscape of calm certainty. The disappointment in his eyes was worse than any rage. It was the look of a father finding his son stealing from his wallet, a quiet, soul-crushing judgment that said, "I expected better from you, and now you have proven you are nothing." The smile, that thin scar of a smile, didn't move. It was fixed, a permanent punctuation mark on his terrible pronouncement. My mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated terror. There were no plans, no strategies, only the primal, screaming certainty that my life as I knew it was over. The world had shrunk to the space between our eyes, a chasm of shadow and yellow light. "Come on out," he said, his voice retaining that same conversational, almost gentle tone. It wasn't a request, it was the soft command one gives to a dog that knows it's been bad. "There's no sense in staying down there. The floor is filthy." He shifted his weight, and the faint scent of his cologne, the one I used to associate with competence and authority, now smelled like embalming fluid. My body refused to obey my brain. It was a block of ice welded to the dusty carpet. But he just waited, his patience an instrument of torture. Slowly, agonizingly, my limbs began to move, clumsy and disconnected, as if I were a puppet and he was pulling the strings. I crawled out from under the desk, the scrape of my knees on the Berber carpet, the sound of utter surrender. The envelopes in my jacket felt like a lead weight, pulling me down, a tombstone I was carrying on my own back. I got to my feet, swaying slightly. The office, once a symbol of my ambition, now felt like an execution chamber. He rose with me, a smooth, fluid motion that belied his age. He wasn't even breathing hard. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering for a moment on the bulge in my jacket. He didn't reach for it. He didn't need to. He had me. "All that work," he sighed, shaking his head with that same profound disappointment. "All that potential. I really thought you were different. I thought you saw the world for what it is, not what you wish it were." He gestured to his chair, an invitation to sit. I remained standing, my feet rooted to the spot. My silence seemed to amuse him. He walked around the desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. He was in his element, the professor ready to deliver his final damning lecture. "You see, chaos, I see an ecosystem," he began, his voice taking on that familiar mentoring cadence. "You see a man like Marcus Thorne, a repeat offender, a drug addict, a drain on society, and you feel pity. I see a predator that needs to be caged before it harms the herd. You call it framing, I call it expediting the inevitable. I give them just enough rope, and they always, always hang themselves. The paperwork is just a formality." The rage, cold and dormant under the fear, began to thaw. It started as a low heat in my stomach, spreading through my veins. "Marcus Thorne was clean," I heard myself say, my voice a dry, cracking whisper. "He had a job, he had a daughter." Vance's smile tightened. "A temporary state of grace, a statistical anomaly. You're still looking at the individual trees, son. You can't see the forest. The forest is choking on weeds, and I am just the gardener." "You're a monster," I said, the words feeling small and useless in the face of his colossal self-righteousness. He actually laughed, a short, dry bark. "No, I'm a pragmatist. You're the one who's a danger. Your sentimentality, your belief in the inherent goodness of broken people. That's the real poison. It lets the wolves back into the sheep pen because you feel sorry for them." He pushed himself off the desk. The lecture was over. "Now, give me the envelopes." It was then that I knew. Talking was over. Logic was useless. There was only one path left. In a single, explosive movement born of pure desperation, I shoved the heavy leather guest chair into his legs and lunged for the door. I didn't think I'd make it. I just knew I couldn't stay. I was wrong. He was faster than I could have imagined. I felt a hand clamp down on the collar of my jacket, yanking me back with incredible force. The fabric ripped, and I stumbled, crashing hard against the wall of filing cabinets. The metallic clang vibrated through my skull. Before I could recover, he had me pinned, his forearm pressed against my throat. He was shockingly strong, his body a knot of dense, coiled muscle. His face was inches from mine, and the disappointment was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. The mask had finally slipped. "You stupid, idealistic child," he hissed, his breath hot and sour. "You were supposed to be my legacy." With his free hand, he ripped open my jacket and tore the manila envelopes from the inside pocket. He held them up for a moment, then let them flutter to the floor between us like dead leaves. The evidence, my only hope, lying scattered at his feet. He eased the pressure on my throat, and I slumped to the floor, gasping for air, the world a blurry mess of polished shoes and scattered paper. He stood over me, straightening his tie, his composure returning as quickly as it had vanished. "Class is over," Arthur Vance said, his voice once again calm, his tone final. "Time for your final exam." My lungs burned, each ragged breath a fresh reminder of his forearm against my windpipe. He stepped back, a watchmaker observing the broken gears of a timepiece he just dismantled. He wasn't looking at me, crumpled on the floor. His gaze was on the scattered envelopes, the flimsy paper that held his entire empire of lies. With a sigh, he bent down, not with the urgency of a man destroying evidence, but with the weary tidiness of someone cleaning up a child's mess. He gathered them, topped them into a neat stack on the edge of his desk, and then he picked up his phone. He didn't even look at the keypad, his fingers dialing a familiar number from muscle memory. He held the receiver to his ear, his eyes finally finding mine. They were calm, almost placid. The final exam had begun, and I was the only student in the room. "Yes, it's Vance," he said into the phone, his voice a mask of controlled distress. "I need security up in my office immediately, and call the police." He paused, listening. I could hear a faint, tinny squawk of a voice on the other end. "No, I'm all right. A little shaken. My junior officer, the new kid, he just attacked me." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I tried to push myself up, to scream that he was lying, but my throat was a raw, constricted mess, and only a strangled croak came out. Vance watched me, a flicker of something almost like pity in his eyes. "Yes, he's still here. He seems to have snapped. Ransacking the office, making wild accusations, something about blackmail." He ran his free hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, mussing it just so. "Please, just hurry." He hung up the phone and placed it gently back in its cradle. He looked around the pristine office, a frown creasing his brow. "This won't do," he murmured to himself. Then he began to perform. With a deliberate, almost theatrical motion, he swept a stack of case files from his desk, sending a cascade of paper fluttering to the floor. He tipped over the lamp, the bulb shattering with a soft pop, casting half the room in deeper shadow.
He kicked the guest chair I had shoved at him, sending it skidding into the wall with a loud thud. He was an artist, painting a scene of chaos and violence where moments before there had been only quiet menace. He was creating a new truth, one that would erase mine completely. I watched, mesmerized by the sheer audacity, the cold, methodical destruction of my reality. He was framing me, not for a minor parole violation, but for assault, for the career-ending sin of attacking a senior officer. The envelopes, my proof, would be recontextualized as a madman's desperate attempt at blackmail. He had turned my own weapon against me with terrifying precision. The paralysis finally broke, replaced by a surge of pure, hopeless adrenaline. I wasn't going to be a prop in his play. I scrambled on my hands and knees, lunging for the stack of envelopes on his desk. It was a fool's move, a last desperate twitch before the end, and he was ready for it.
He sidestepped my clumsy charge and brought his foot down hard on my hand, pinning it to the floor. A bolt of white-hot pain shot up my arm, and I cried out. He leaned down, his face close to mine again, the scent of his cologne thick in the air. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice sincere. "A struggle makes it so much more believable." He then took the corner of his heavy oak desk and scraped it hard against his own forearm, leaving a raw, red mark on his skin. He examined it with satisfaction. The perfect finishing touch. The office door burst open. 2 senior department officers, men I'd shared coffee with that very morning, stood silhouetted in the hallway light. Their eyes widened, taking in the scene Vance had so masterfully composed, the shattered lamp, the scattered papers, their legendary colleague breathing heavily with a bleeding arm, and me, the rookie, wild-eyed and pinned on the floor like an animal. "Arthur, my God, what happened?" one of them yelled, rushing to his side. Vance leaned heavily on his desk, a perfect portrayal of a shaken victim. "He just lost it," Vance said, his voice trembling slightly. "Started screaming, throwing things, said I was ruining my career." I tried to speak, to tell them the truth, but my voice was lost in the noise. "It's not true. Check the envelopes. He's the one—" My words were cut off as the second officer hauled me to my feet, twisting my arm behind my back with practiced force. Being walked through the bullpen was the longest journey of my life. Every head turned, every pair of eyes was a nail hammered into my coffin. I saw faces I recognized, colleagues, friends, people who had congratulated me on being assigned to Vance. I saw confusion, disappointment, and worst of all, a dawning belief in the story that was already spreading through the office like a virus. I saw Maria, standing by the water cooler, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a horrified disbelief that I knew would soon curdle into certainty. In that moment, I wasn't just being arrested, I was being erased. My name, my career, my entire future was dissolving in the acid of Arthur Vance's perfect lie. He hadn't just beaten me, he had unwritten me. I lost my job, of course. I lost the looming legal battle. I lost the respect of everyone I had ever worked with. My name is now a cautionary tale whispered to new recruits. And Arthur Vance? He received a departmental commendation for his grace under pressure. His success rate remains legendary. He's still out there, the quiet, competent gardener, diligently pulling the weeds he deems unworthy of the sun, protecting his forest by burning down any tree that grows in a direction he doesn't like. He took everything from me, but he left me with the ghost of his closing argument, a question that follows me through every sleepless night and every dead-end job I've worked since. He was a monster, a liar, a man who broke the law to enforce his own twisted version of it. But he truly believed he was making the world a safer, more orderly place.
He sacrificed a few guilty men and one innocent one to keep his statistics perfect, to keep the predators caged, to maintain the illusion of a system that worked. He called it pragmatism. I called it evil. But when you look at the chaos, at the revolving door of a justice system that so often fails, you have to ask yourself the question he forced upon me. In a world this broken, does it take a monster to keep the other monsters at bay? Let us know in the comments.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new stories every day.